I've been asked to talk about mental health from the perspective of PhDs, and what I'm going to do is actually bring forward an exercise of thinking about what to do about mental health, possibly on a national scale. And I think in general this is a way, for me at least, to talk about interventions into academic life, into the academic system, that require thinking and reflection on what scale things should change. So when talking about mental health, usually this tends to be perceived as this individual level problem, specifically when thinking about what kind of interventions are necessary, right? So as something that starts at the individual level, and it also can be solved at the individual level. And then from this point of view, then mental health with respect to PhD candidates is really seen as something that is a product of a lack of resilience with respect to all these systemic and institutional dynamics that we already just briefly discussed. So if we think of mental health as something that happens at an individual level, then also the kind of interventions are as follows. So I looked at the VU website on what is organized during the mental or well-being week, I think it was called. I'm not entirely sure. And all these the game nights, the book clubs, the dialogues, the film days, board game nights seem to also imply that mental health can be solved there by doing something that, contributes to resilience and coping with a system that potentially may be problematic. So why should we care about mental health? That seems somehow like an obvious question. On the one hand, we can say we would like everybody to be happy. But at the same time, I also think that it is also fine that academics struggle as long as they are safe, in the sense that they do not have to fear any consequences that come out of that specific struggles that they are struggling with. So I think in general we can say that a good PhD trajectory requires time, supervision, feedback, continuity, safety, as I just said, room for trial and error. It was not a completely harmless question, and realistic expectations of what a PhD specifically should lead to. And this is, in that sense, not only relevant for well-being, it's also relevant for research integrity and research quality. Specifically, I would say the extent to which PhD candidates perceive that they feel socially safe in this regard. Now, there is quite some research on this topic, as Yuri just mentioned, and I, in preparation of this, also read some of the research on PhD well-being, and indeed these studies tend to suggest that there is a strong, or there is a lot, the prevalence of mental health symptoms or bad mental health symptoms is significantly higher in the group of PhDs as compared to other groups in society that are higher educated. So in that sense, there are a lot of unhappy people among PhD candidates. The question of causality are unresolved most of the time. Is this because something is happening during the PhD trajectory that makes these people unhappy, or is it that just unhappy people enter the academy? That was my question to Yuri. Yeah. But that does not really matter. We can just at least assume that there are just a lot of unhappy people among PhD candidates. I think a good study is, I listed some of those, and I guess most of you from the Netherlands Research Integrity Network know these studies or these surveys. There is this one from Belgium indicating that the prevalence is about 32% unhappiness. There is a systemic review that is pretty good. There is also a recent one that also, I think it's this one. It compares, is not only looking at the perceived mental or well-being, but also looking at the extent to which PhD candidates are actually using clinical psychiatric care as compared to other groups in society, and again shows it's significantly higher. So what research is showing is this prevalence issue here. I think that is what research can add here, and then we can investigate this in cross-sectional studies again and again. But this is I think something that we can be convinced of out of the research that has been done. Now again, what is still unresolved is whether this is indeed a systemic issue or an individual level issue, and the question is what that means, that distinction. So I asked ChatGPT. I've seen that this is a trick that many speakers do nowadays, to ask ChatGPT to sort of unravel all kinds of biases that we then have. I also wanted to do this once. So I asked, give me a photo of a PhD supervisor. It shows some biases and some biases it does not. But what was striking to me, and actually the rhetorical point I had when asking this question, is that it also shows that this really is about individuals. Again, not only the PhD researchers that are seen as individuals in this issue, but also the supervisors. Because we think of a supervisor as an individual. And I would like to invite you to reconsider that, right? So, and to think of PhDs, or PhD research, and also thus mental health among PhD researchers as an issue of capacity. And that asks us to reconsider PhD supervisor relationships as these master-apprentice relationships, because it takes a village in this sense to raise PhDs, so to speak, a supervisory team. When we talk about this relationship, it is the PhD and the supervisory team. And what does then good supervision require? Time for feedback, a substantive expertise, continuity, role, clarity. These are all a little bit cliches, maybe even, but you have to think about them. I would say on this level of the team that is supervising PhDs. And that's also the connection between these two elements, and also why I think maybe the quantitative dimension here matters a lot. That's why I highlighted time, is that what research does or suggests is a strong correlation between happy PhDs and the amount of hours that supervisors are as a team spending on these PhDs. So time there may be an element or not, or knob is it, which we can turn. So, I am indeed a historian, mainly, and my research is about how things proliferate in society, how proliferation facilitates another scale to also tackle specific issues. So that's what I tend to investigate. Also a way to investigate collective action or collective change in this regard. And this matters to me, because when all these recommendations on improving mental health among PhDs, indeed the interventions proposed feel okay or difficult to disagree with, usually, also the ones that you just suggested. Yeah, we can indeed improve or just ask for more stable positions in academia, but yeah, okay, and nobody disagrees, but the disagreement comes when thinking about the right scale of the problem. So, if we think about mental health in PhDs, there's the research group, and then indeed team culture, individual supervisors come into view. If you think about mental health, mental well-being of PhDs at the level of the faculty, then PhD policy is important. Not necessarily at the level of the research group, I would say. It's a different way of conceptualizing the problem. At the level of the university, there is the promotiereglement, PhD regulations that are important there. Also things about or issues of workload and of graduate schools, of workload specifically, can perhaps not necessarily be solved in research teams. Maybe it can, but it's a different way of solving that issue or improving things, and improving, in this sense, time. So that's also why PNN, that's why PNN focuses on the national scale. So what can we do at the national scale to improve mental well-being? Perhaps not saying that every supervisor should spend more time on every PhD candidate, but think about the elements that facilitate that possibility. So, yeah, that's also here. There always in those cases when scaling up interventions, it's a double-edged sword between if you would like to facilitate diversity or standardize things. And that's why PNN, for example, focuses on the length of contracts as a way to move things around on a national scale. And of course, we also participate in labor conditions or the collective labor agreements and the negotiations on that, because that is what can be done on a national scale, not necessarily at the level of these graduate schools. So, where's it go? Yeah, so I in the Netherlands, and that's why I would invite again from the PNN perspective this national scale, this national scale to talk about numbers that can be framed at the level of the Dutch national system. And what we then see is that in the past 25 years, the research infrastructure has expanded. That's not necessarily what we as individuals perceive when we follow the news or we're in Actie, for example. It feels like there are budget cuts all the time. That's not true. There is only more money going to science in absolute terms. So this is perhaps a little bit of a misleading graph. I am a bit more afraid to show this at the National Network for Research Integrity than yesterday at the Profkippen Symposium. But what it shows is that there is an increase. These are the right numbers. For those who were there yesterday, I mixed them up. So paid PhD time grew by about 64%. Senior formal capacity grew by about 49%. It both grew, but the point is that the ratio is getting worse. So the system has expanded PhD research faster than it expanded the formal capacity expected to carry it. Now, Profkippen, indeed, yesterday we discussed this issue as well. And what the Young Academy proposes is to redistribute PhD researchers across specific individual supervisors. Well, the problem then is who supervises how many PhDs. But I think the more important question is how many PhDs can the system responsibly supervise? But that does not take into account scarcity of research time, as Yuri showed in his opinion piece in Trouw, for example. Maybe there should be just less PhDs in the Netherlands to do something about improving this ratio. I'm going towards my conclusion quickly. Because how can we explain this expansion or the deteriorating ratio between PhD researchers on the one hand and supervisors on the other hand? We can explain this because PhDs are usually seen as a proxy indicator for quality of individual academics, right? The more PhDs you supervise, the more your career progresses. So that can be also a way to solving your mental health issues as a senior academic, perhaps, but not necessarily so if you think about it from an individual perspective. So in 2026, the total Rijksbijdrage from the government was 7 billion, research component is 3 billion. Of that, 500 million is distributed based on the number of PhDs per university. I'm going quickly here. So, and that 500 million is then indeed here, or it explains that how PhDs at the level of individual academics can be seen as a proxy indicator, because it helps getting more money from this pie compared to other universities. So it is in that sense a race to the bottom, because if universities compete for the amount of PhD candidates while the pie stays the same, it's still roughly 500 million. It's a bit more, but if you correct for inflation, then the number of the money per PhD candidate is declining significantly from more than 100K in 2017 to a bit above 19K per PhD currently. Okay. So this is, in that sense, a macro level problem. That does not necessarily mean that this is the case for every individual academic. It is just a proxy indicator, and perhaps also a way that we can do something about this issue on a national scale. So, as I just said, it works as a proxy indicator for individual academics. So what to do about this? For PhD's perspective, it's of course also bad is that this proxy indicator and the ratio between the capacity of supervisors and PhD is deteriorating because of all the obvious issues, delayed feedback, unclear expectations, supervisor dependency, contract uncertainty, stress and isolation. We can imagine this, I think, very easily at an individual level. Now, to my conclusion, because what can we do about this? So, why not another variable? So rather than distributing money based on the number of PhD candidates per university, what about if we take into account this ratio at universities and use that as a way to distribute money? So that is a bit abstract. What I mean is what we use an indicator that relates the number of completed PhDs to senior academic capacity within a university, see how that ratio compares to other universities, and use that ratio to distribute money across universities, in addition to also distributing money based on the actual number of completed PhD diplomas. This is a formula that illustrates that dynamic. So, of course, if you start using that, you are comparing the number of associate professors and professors on the one hand and PhDs on the other hand, and that, of course, rewards those universities that have a lot of professors and associate professors and less PhDs. So to anticipate any reallocation effects, you need to give universities some time to you could say, to manage all the differences that this kind of funding scheme will contribute to. Is, for example, start in 2027 with distribute this 500 million, 90% of this 500 million based on completed doctoral dissertations. 10% based on this new variable, so the ratio between PhDs and supervisors. And then in 2000, so after four years, when the number of PhD dissertations have been finished, start with 80%, 2035, 57%. To give you some impression on what this would mean for universities. So this is the total of this is indeed about 500 million. The VU, where we are now, does compare to the rest of the Netherlands well, in the sense that they would get a little bit more money than they would get now, as compared to, for example, the Rijksuniversiteit Groningen would receive less money if we start applying this ratio now based on distributing this 500 million or 10% of this 500 million based on the distribution or the ratio between supervisors and PhDs. So, to conclude. So for PhD candidates, capacity is, I think, not an abstract or macro level issue only. It's very real. It's about receiving feedback now or months later. PhDs know this, I would say, or are familiar with this issue all the time. So having more person to turn to, know what is expected of them, also being able to use sick leave, and in that sense, mental health by design means recreating infrastructural conditions beforehand, and to think about improving mental health not only at an individual level, but also thinking about that on a national scale, meaning talking about the infrastructural components that facilitate that supervisors can spend more time, more hours per PhD candidate as a team. And as research has shown, is that at least there is a strong correlation between the amount of hours spent on PhDs and mental health. That's it.